Well, hey there, and welcome to yet another one of my cheesy YouTube videos. On this video, we're going to take off the carburetor of this Troy Bilt Pony rototiller. Little disclaimer here, I've already fixed the carburetor. It would run and it would stall. And in the process of doing other repairs to it, I took the carburetor off and I went through it. It actually runs good now, but my video, the contents I got to make a video was kind of terrible, so I'm doing it again just for you. So let's get started. First thing we need to do is get to the carburetor. This is a Briggs Stratton Intek 7 horsepower engine. This screw for my air cleaner is in really bad shape, so there's the air cleaner. Air cleaner kind of sits in there, and you got a piece of foam in front of it. The fuel lever is up and down, which is off. I need to remove the line from the carburetor. Get me. Got the line off. Next, I got two bolts inside of here. I believe they're 8s. This little Troy Bilt Pony is smaller than my horse's, and it's kind of handy. And it actually runs quite well. I believe these are 10s. You got a piece of linkage and a little fine spring. They are in 2 separate holes. Just got to twist and turn the carburetor to work them out. Carburetor's off. I don't need this with me, so I'll leave this out here also. We're going to take this carburetor shop and tear it apart, see what we can find. I spun the engine over and she'll run smooth for 5 seconds maybe, then shuts off. So tells me it's starving for fuel. I pulled the fuel line off this where it goes on the carburetor right here, and I can just let it pour into a bucket from the fuel tank through the filter and just continuously pour. So that tells me it's not the fuel filter that's stopped up, and only the symptoms of a stopped up fuel filter, or obviously something in the carburetor that's stopped up, is shut it off, fuel drain past the obstruction, get into the bowl, fill the bowl, start it up, run the bowl dry. It can't replenish the fuel in the bowl quick enough, it stalls. Give it a minute or two, it'll start right back up, or a few seconds or whatever it takes, and then it'll run and then starve and then shut off again. Okay, got the carburetor. Just a few things. This end where the air cleaner hooked up to is where the choke is. The choke is made to cut airflow off to cause the carburetor to draw fuel in a more rich fashion in order for cold starts. Typically running, the choke should be wide open. This is the inlet. This is where fuel goes into the bowl. This is the throttle. The throttle has a idle screw right here, and the idle screw adjusts the throttle so it never fully closes. If it were to fully close and completely choke off the air, the machine would stall. And the idle screw just cracks that throttle a little bit. There's a nut on the bottom of this particular carburetor. Has a passageway in it. This is the main jet. The main jet restricts the fuel flow into the carburetor. Okay, I can blow through it. Here's a bowl. You can make sure your bowl is clean. A lot of times the carburetor's been sitting, crud gets inside the bowl, rust, crud, whatever, and it will help prevent the float from doing its job, because the float's got to drop down, let fuel in. It floats up on the fuel, shuts the needle valve off, and shuts fuel off. That's got to work correctly, or your machine will not run correctly. Pin holds the float on. Some floats are brass. This is my float. It's plastic. There's no evidence that it's bad. There's a little bit of rust on it from it laying in the bottom of the bowl. Well, here's the needle valve. This needle valve hangs on the float. It's got a little wire that hangs on a little arm there, and the needle valve moves with the float. So the float is continuously keeping the level of gas in the bowl consistent. Needle valve drops into a hole on the carburetor, and there's a seat inside that hole, just like there's a taper on the needle valve, and that's how it shuts off. So if the needle valve and or the seat are corroded, it can let gasoline pass by when it's supposed to be shut off. So my next question is there something inside this fuel intake? And so far the answer is no. And the problem could very well be in this area. And I tend to think it is, because it runs and then it starves. This little carburetor doesn't have many places to take it apart. So I've got a welding tip cleaner, and I am just shoving it through every hole I can find. I shove it till it bottoms out. I'll use my thumb to mark it. Then I'll pull it out and I'll lay it against the housing with my thumb bottomed out and say, yeah, that went up high enough. Okay, so we know how the float works. We know that this screw is also the main jet, and it's what holds the bowl on. When it's screwed in place, there's a little gap right here in the housing lets fuel into a hole in the side of the screw and up the main jet. There are two other holes inside once the fuel gets past the main jet. One is the main nozzle. The main nozzle goes up into the center of the carburetor, into the airstream, into what's called the ventry. The ventry is a spot where the main passageway gets smaller, which creates a vacuum. So that vacuum will start drawing fuel from the bowl. On the back of the carburetor, you have 3 air holes. You got one right here, and I do believe that supplies atmospheric air to the idle circuit when the choke is closed. The other air hole, which is inside here, when I spray carburetor clean through there, it comes out the second passage, and I believe that is to allow atmospheric air to mix with the fuel going up into the main nozzle. It helps atomize the fuel. Okay, this is an example of what a nozzle would look like. This carburetor has a built-in nozzle, so we can't see it. So I thought I'd get this one out and just show that your nozzle will have these little teeny holes, and fuel is going up to the center of the nozzle. Air is surrounded the nozzle on the outside and is drawn into these holes to help atomize the fuel. And this end of the nozzle would be sticking out into the ventry. If we was to look inside, right past the throttle plate, up inside there are about 4 or 5 tiny little holes drilled into the side of the housing. The first hole is right where it closes, the throttle plate closes, and as the throttle plate is at the idle, in the idle position, which is almost closed, it creates a vacuum as it tries to suck air past this teeny space. And there's a little teeny port in here that is exposed to that vacuum, so it sucks fuel through that port, and as it starts to crack open, it allows more of these little ports to dump fuel into the airstream for the idle circuit. And then once it gets to a certain point, then the ventry starts to pick up a vacuum, and the main jet starts dumping a fuel air mixture. There's a third air port on the back of the carburetor, and that's right here. And that allows air to come out right down in here in the top of the bowl. That is your bowl vent. Bowl vent's very crucial because if not, it would create a vacuum inside the bowl, and the float and the fuel supply wouldn't work properly, and your carburetor would not work right. So you got to have your bowl vented to atmosphere. And that's what this hole is and this hole is. They're tied to each other. That's another crucial thing, is be careful using gasket sealer, because if you allow gasket sealer to plug this hole, you're plugging your bowl vent. Except to put a teeny coat on a gasket to hold a gasket in place, I don't use gasket sealer. And I haven't used it to hold a gasket in place in a long time. If you got good, clean, smooth, flat mating surfaces, your gasket doesn't need sealer, unless your manufacturer calls for it. But gasket sealer is overused, and in a lot of applications, gasket sealer can cause a problem. There are these Welsh plugs in here that if I had a kit that had Welsh plugs in it, I could actually pop these plugs out to better access the passageways and do a better job at cleaning everything up. But I don't have a kit, and I don't have them plugs. Maintaining the proper air and fuel flow through a carburetor is very important. Therefore, you want to check your shaft, your throttle shaft, for play. If there's excessive play, it would be creating access for air to come down through the shaft and enter the carburetor, and that will have a direct effect on the fuel-air ratio. And the fact that gasoline is garbage, so we need to have an understanding of how our carburetors work if we expect to keep our small engines running. Either that, or you're going to be taken to the small engine shop, and then you are subject to their honesty. And quite frankly, well, you're subject to two things. You're subject to their honesty, and you're also subject to their competence. And I promise you, between the two, it really dwindles down the pool of knowledgeable mechanics. Okay, it's running. Cleaning out all the ports seems to have done the job. There you have it. Thanks for watching my video. Please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and look forward to more videos. I do all sorts of stuff. That's why my channel is Aimless. I'm trying to put out one Mechanic-In video every Friday. And if I do something other than Mechanic-In, I'll usually put it online just as soon as I do it. Just kind of fill in. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this helped people out. Thanks. Remember, if you love life and learning new things, go aimless.com.